Throughout the 11 seasons of The Walking Dead, we are introduced to a plethora of different communities. Some are warm and inviting, some are hostile and fortified, and others just flat out eat people. But today, me and my good friend Captain Gold are going to go through every single community shown in the Walking Dead main series and rank all 20 of them. Now, before we get into this video, I'd quickly like to lay down some ground rules for how each community is being ranked. Firstly, we are going to assume we are a part of each community. So for example, Terminus, we don't have to worry about being eaten because we are essentially the cannibals in that scenario. And secondly, we've assessed each community on the following factors: comfort, food and water supplies, leadership, defense, longevity, and how much we'd just like to live there. So now you know the stipulations that have gone into the rankings, let's get straight into the video. Coming in at dead last, by quite some margin as well, is the feral human community we saw in Season 11, Episode 6, titled On the Inside. Now, the show never specifies how long this community had been living here, but based on the skeletons found in one of the rooms, the length of their hair, and the paleness in their skin, they have been prowling this house for multiple years of the apocalypse. I mean, season 11 of the show takes place roughly 12 years into the apocalypse, so for all we know, they could have been there as long as a decade. Now, I'm sure I don't have to convince you all too much on why living in the walls of a house with some lunatic cannibals isn't the most ideal of situations, but let me quickly break it down. Firstly, their community has extremely poor hygiene that would increase the chances of you catching a disease or falling ill. The community seemingly have no medical supplies either to combat this issue. On top of this, there's no sustainable food or water source that we see in the one episode they appear in. They live in a singular house with zero fortifications, and they are also shown to have zero firearms and also be wiped out by a small horde of walkers. This community is also, stating the obvious, cannibals, sleeping in the walls of an old creepy house that wouldn't be very comfortable. The ferals walk around on all fours most of the time, so I am certain they probably all have achy backs as well. And finally, they don't strike me as having the most riveting of personalities to keep yourself entertained when you're not hunting unsuspecting victims. So to summarise, you'd have no medical supplies, a severe lack of vitamin D as they barely ever see the sunlight, they hunt and eat unsuspected people, so you'd have to revert to cannibalism, they have unhygienic and uncomfortable living conditions, no defence against larger communities or hordes, no firearms that we see in the episode at least, and live in a primitive manner. There is no hierarchy or rules, it's everybody for themselves, and it's basically the Whisperer's way of life crammed into the confined space of an old house's walls. Oh, and I'm sure these guys absolutely stink as well. But now we've talked about the long list of negatives, let's actually talk about the couple of positives here. On the longevity front, they have survived 12 years into the apocalypse, which is a lot longer than many others on this list, and they also hide in the walls of a house, which is actually quite clever, as if people are unaware of their existence, once locked in the house with the ferals themselves, this community have a huge upper hand. They have peepholes, trapdoors, and hidden crawl spaces everywhere throughout the mansion. But ultimately, living in a community of feral humans would be my idea of hell, and I think their existence this late into the show serves as more of a one-off fright factor than a testament to the community's survival skills. I mean, we saw them be outsmarted by two barely armed, exhausted individuals in Connie and Virgil. That just proves to us they aren't exactly a formidable community to come up against.
Hello, it's me, Captain Gold. Now, since I'm a guest on Theo's channel, I'll be keeping my input quite short. But yeah, that being said, there's not much I can really add to the discussion regarding the feral people. These freaks look like the final evolutionary state of kids who never touch grass. Out here looking like the creatures from The Descent or even Gollum from The Lord of the Rings. You know what, it's honestly a miracle that they've even managed to survive as long as they have. It's almost as if the writers of the show just wanted an excuse to write a horror-centric episode that didn't focus on zombies.
Coming in at a shockingly bad 19th place is the Whisperers. Now, much like the feral people community, much of the same reasons apply here. There's no hygiene, no walls or protection from others, or even the elements at that matter, awful conditions to sleep in and eat in, and to put the cherry on top, you're under the dictatorship of Alpha. What she says goes, and if she wants you to lead a horde of walkers to the gates of a community, that's exactly what you'd have to do. And one wrong word or mistake could result in you getting your head chopped off. I also think whilst the concept of walking with the dead is incredibly clever, it also leaves you vulnerable to being killed by others, because you have to act like a walker. So much of your survival skills whilst invading other communities or attacking people come from the hope you just flat out don't get shot as you slowly bumble up to them. And although slightly better company than the non-verbal ferals, the Whisperers aren't exactly a warm and friendly bunch. I mean, we see in the show these people without hesitation would leave a baby behind to be eaten by walkers. They are insanely cruel. And finally, many atrocities are known to take place in their camps, from thefts and fights all the way to murder, and let's just say, to keep it PG, unconsenting love. So you could be eating your baked squirrel at the campfire and suddenly a 6'6" beta decides not only does he want your dinner, but also wants some extracurricular activities with you. This is pure nightmare fuel to me, and on top of all of these drawbacks, they have no sustainable food or water sources, little firearms, and are constantly moving around, meaning they have no walls or fortifications. So you may be wondering what factors make them rank higher than the ferals. Well, firstly, at least you get to leave the house and see sunlight, and you don't have to revert to cannibalism, as well as the fact the group have survived over a decade into the outbreak, so you can't argue their style of survival isn't effective. And secondly, at least these people can actually speak to one another, at least in some capacity, so you could even make, in theory, some friends in the Whisperer camp. On top of all of this, wearing your Whisperer mask at least renders you pretty much immune from walker attacks. So whilst yes, it's definitely not ideal, I think I would rather be a part of the Whisperers than I would be a part of the ferals. Okay, so now you've heard my say, let me hand the stage to Captain Gold.
Oh boy, here we go. The Whisperers. You know, I've done nothing but talk mad trash about this group in the past on my channel, and I'll just do y'all a favor and just summarize my thoughts about them. They sleep in the same exact bush they defecate and procreate in. Their command structure is that of a cult that was easily decapitated by a nerfed version of Negan. Their primary warfighting doctrine is to use hordes of walkers that can be easily turned against them. Their only ranged weaponry is a couple of bows and arrows, and one sawed-off, double-barreled shotgun. This community is honestly a joke, guys. I mean, scary, sure, philosophically and psychologically interesting, sure, but not a community I'd want to join.
In at 18th place, we have Randall's group that we meet in Season 2 of the series. Now, not a lot is known about this community, as we never see their base, many of their members are unknown, and we have no idea what their food or water supplies did look like. Now, not a lot is known about this community. I mean, we never see their base, many of their members are unknown, we have no idea what their food and water supplies look like, or if they had any fortifications and weapons. But what we do know is there are around 30 members. We also know they have at least several guns at their disposal and are hostile. Now, due to this group's existence being entirely off-screen, it's really hard to rank them on this list, but considering the fact Randall said atrocities much like what happened in the Whisperer camp occurred here, we know the vast majority of them aren't nice people. And bear in mind, this is just weeks into the apocalypse, and the fact the group had already devolved into this way of living is very alarming. To be honest, there is little information on them other than it's a camp full of who had no central leader and seemingly few rules. Again, it's speculation, but I reckon their base was probably literally just a few pitch tents with a weak perimeter, so the community likely didn't last long after the events of Season 2. As for why they rank above the Whisperers and the Ferals though, well, I think their quality of life would have just been so much better. You have a roof over your head, a sleeping bag, you live in rural Georgia, which is not only very beautiful, but also fairly remote, meaning there would be less people and walkers in close proximity. And again, I think you're more likely to find a small group of people within this community who you could grow to trust and maybe even run away with one day. And to be honest, this is probably how many of the Whisperers and Ferals were during the initial days of the outbreak, a part of smaller splinter communities just like this one. And look, of course, we don't know this group's fate, but I think it's fairly safe to assume they lived a lot fewer days into the apocalypse than the Whisperers and the Ferals. But I'd rather sleep in a tent eating beans surrounded by rolling hills than live in the walls of a house eating people.
Ah yes, Randall's group, a roaming gang of nomadic pillagers we never truly got to meet. The fact that they enjoy women and minors is enough for me to say this group absolutely sucks. Plus their combat capability can't be all that great, considering they lost a firefight to Season 2 Rick, the weakest version of Glenn, and a plastered Hershel. Oh, and I guess I must also mention that sedentary communities are just better than nomadic ones. I mean, this should be common sense, but I know some of y'all will disagree. So just go ahead and look at the modern meta. The most prosperous and powerful nations on Earth, both currently and in history, are just not nomadic. Even the Mongol Empire had sedentary settlements.
In at 17th, we have the Wolves. Now, I reckon some of you right now are wondering how they've even gotten this high on the tier list, and whilst yes, it is a less than ideal community to be a part of, there are a few positives here. Now, of course, they do roam around attacking and invading communities, but at least they stay in those communities for short periods of time, meaning you could sleep on an actual bed or eat some decent food and rest up, and demonstrate some pretty advanced knowledge for their time in the apocalypse. The fact that they were able to set traps with live walkers inside them shows an understanding of the dead that was long before their time, and the group managed to survive around a year into the apocalypse. And finally, Owen, although being all round a pretty terrible person, deep down there was a little bit of good in him, as demonstrated when he sacrificed himself for Denise in the show. But look, just because there are a few positives here, it doesn't change the fact that this would be an awful community to be a part of. You'd have to slaughter innocent people for no good reason, constantly be ready to fight and invade, making it a dangerous lifestyle, and you wouldn't be able to trust your fellow wolves because they are all absolutely insane. And once again, for the fact this community spend much of their time on the move, this would make you prone to walker attacks and other humans, and the wolves never settle in one place, meaning they don't have fortifications or a reliable food and water supply. And while sometimes you may be able to sleep in the bed of a community you've just slaughtered, for the most part, you're probably sleeping in a bush on the floor somewhere. Oh, and you also have to run around with a massive W engraved into your forehead. Look, the wolves are just flat out not good people, and to be a part of their group you would also have to adopt their way of life, which is senseless violence and killing. And whilst yes, it may offer some post-apocalyptic luxuries on occasion, like a warm bed or a tin of beans, which is why it does rank above the other communities, for the most part it would still be awful.
So the wolves are kind of hard to judge for me because not much is known about them. That being said, their constant aggression and nomadic lifestyle is just not a recipe for longevity. They're also a bit crazy, but at the very least they don't seem to be and at least they aren't as bad as the Whisperers or Ferals.
Now, our next community is again a pretty awful bunch to be a part of, and that is of course the Claimers. Now, the reason they are so low on this list is not only are they awful people, I mean this guy on screen even tried to essay Carl, which Rick swiftly put an end to, but they also live under the rules of a singular phrase, claimed. Anytime somebody shouts that, it means that they automatically get to keep whatever it is they're referring to when saying the phrase. But this rule is not only extremely exploitable, but also pretty futile. I mean, think about the amount of arguments and fights that would break out between one another due to a he said, she said scenario. Now, the Claimers are led by a man named Joe, who isn't exactly the nicest person on the planet. And whilst yes, there are numerous members of this community, many of them are only looking out for themselves, and I'm sure they wouldn't hesitate to sacrifice you or just flat out leave you behind in a spot of bother. So it would be like surviving alone despite the fact you're surrounded by people. They are, however, better than the wolves because they don't always engage in senseless violence, so you wouldn't have to be constantly risking your life invading people. Also, this community once again roam around and do occasionally get that post-apocalyptic luxury lifestyle, such as canned food, a roof over your head, and even a warm bed. And finally, they don't feel the need to revert to cannibalism like some others on this list, and many of them have experience in combat and knowledge of tracking and hunting, which does make them a valuable asset in the landscape of an apocalypse. But altogether, this is a pretty awful group to be a part of, filled with terrible people.
Alright, I know I'm gonna get in trouble for saying this, but the Claimers have a painfully infantile set of rules. I mean, yeah, this helps to demonstrate the importance of having some basic rudimentary standard for ethics and or a social contract, but generally speaking, the Claimers' rules are the sort of rules a toddler would come up with. You see that cool subscribe button? That's mine. You want to take it? You die. You lie? You get it beaten, the severity of which depends on the general attitude of the day. Guys, this group isn't a serious one. They were eventually gonna die.
Now at the 15th spot I've got the Vatos gang, and despite being a group of well-intended, capable survivors, the reason they rank so low is their location. Not only have they chosen a base that lacked the necessary fortification to survive long periods in the apocalypse, but they also chose a location within the busy and walker-filled city of Atlanta. But to put the cherry on top, they chose an old people's home. Now, of course, that's because in the show they are good people looking out for the elderly who were left behind by the carers and nurses in the offset of the wildfire virus. But unfortunately, this means many of their members are pretty immobile and unable to contribute in any meaningful way, as well as providing great risk to the group. Looking after old and ill survivors is a humane thing to do, but in this world, nice guys really do finish last, as demonstrated by the deleted scene in the Season 2 premiere, where we see the Vatos gang were totally wiped out by an unknown community. But even if they hadn't had this off-screen massacre, I still believe the community was a ticking time bomb, as elderly and ill patients could die and reanimate at any moment, and many of the elderly people probably aren't capable of fighting or outrunning even a singular walker, so one death could result in mass casualties and even a small horde of the dead attacking from inside the walls. But with all that being said, there are some positives with the Vatos gang, which is why they do rank above 5 other communities in this list. Firstly, after Rick's group split the bag of weapons with them, we know they at least have some firepower within the group. They also have access to medical supplies, warmth and comfy beds, whilst having a good moral code and being nice people, which is a big added bonus in comparison to the communities that have come before them in this list. And finally, whilst yes, a lot of their members are elderly, the non-elderly members of the Vatos gang are pretty fit and able. But look, the fact this group died just months into the apocalypse means they definitely lose points on the longevity front. But I think with a different location, and maybe dare I say minus the old people, the Vatos gang could have been a solid community and survived for a decent amount of time into the apocalypse. Because it's the only real problem with the group, their location. But that being said, it's a pretty big issue that would ultimately wind up getting them killed.
As terrible as this sounds, anyone who sets up a base in the middle of Atlanta, Georgia, just to take care of a bunch of old people who are going to die the minute medical supplies dry up, is just a remarkably stupid imbecile. The Vatos gang was pretty much destined to die.
In at 14th place, we have the Atlanta camp. Now honestly, this is what I imagine Randall's group setup kind of looked like. However, the Atlanta camp doesn't have the atrocities that occurred there, which is a big factor as to why it ranks 4 spots higher than it. The Atlanta camp is also nestled in the hills of the outskirts of Atlanta, meaning it's far away enough to be hidden from other communities and survivors and also avoid many of the walkers, but it's also in a close enough proximity to go into the city for supplies. This community is also situated above a quarry which offers a large body of fresh water that can be boiled and converted into drinking water, and for food there's forest all around them providing nuts, berries and game to hunt. Plus you've also got Daryl doing the hunting, so you know he's going to provide. It also has relative post-apocalyptic luxury. Whether you're sleeping in a tent or in Dale's RV, there would be warmth, clean water, and a sense of family amongst the tight-knit group. And of course, the glaring benefit of having the main character Rick Grimes being there to lend you some plot armor to get you through the early days of the outbreak. But this camp has a lot of problems. Firstly, it's not secure at all, and despite the group getting extremely lucky going over a month without encountering a single horde of walkers, we saw only a small group of the dead stumble in and totally destroy the place, causing the survivors to outright flee. On top of this, there was a weak hierarchy, and one well-coordinated attack from looters could easily result in death. And finally, the existence of Ed Peltier is enough to stop anyone from joining this community. But in all seriousness, they have little weapons, no fortifications or fencing, and most importantly, no long-term plan for survival. As Rick and Shane were busy arguing about who's going to sleep with Lori. So whilst yes, this is a huge step up from living in the walls of an abandoned house waiting to eat other people, it's far from perfect, as demonstrated by the fact the camp got destroyed just months into the outbreak, causing it to lose massive points on the longevity front.
The Atlanta camp was a half measure and was never designed to last indefinitely, because Shane was too busy plowing Lori in the woods and waiting to take a convoy to Fort Benning. Now, the location itself was decent, as it was near a freshwater source, but the human capital sucked and there was no real perimeter defense. Also, food scarcity was a real long-term concern.
At the 13th position, I've got the Reapers. Now, despite this being a community made of highly trained ex-military soldiers and being arguably the most capable group in terms of combat in the entire series, they rank at a staggeringly low 13th due to several factors. Again, much like the wolves, you'd have to ravage and slaughter innocent people in order to invade their communities, which would often put you in dangerous positions. And you're also under the command of Pope, a ruthless and unpredictable leader. The Reapers are also kind of like a cult in the sense that once you join, you can never leave, and if you attempt to, they will send some highly trained killers to track you down and kill you. On top of this, the group have made a lot of enemies due to their senseless violence, which in the show would cause their downfall, and due to this fact, it would make the community vulnerable to a lot of attacks. But there are some pretty good positives. Firstly, you'd be surrounded by a group of people who would not only treat you like family, but are also highly trained soldiers. You'd never have to worry about walkers for the most part, or even other people, as they would scout out every nook and cranny whilst being able to best pretty much anybody in terms of hand-to-hand combat. I see the Reapers as a slightly less evil version of the Wolves, with better fighters, but unlike the Wolves, they actually stay in the communities that they invade, making their violence not totally senseless, I guess. It's a group that survived well over 12 years into the apocalypse, which only demonstrates their capabilities. And whilst yes, they are nomadic in nature, they tend to find communities with water supplies, food, shelter, and weapons to take for themselves. So if you could survive the siege, you would definitely reap the rewards. Look, this group of highly trained killers are cutthroat and ruthless, but they do treat one another with respect and like family. Plus, with the stipulations of this video, we are assuming you are part of that family. So in this scenario, you would be looked after. Their leader Pope, in my opinion, is the biggest drawback, however, as he is an unhinged, glorified dictator who leads the group through fear and religion. And if you could accept the fact you'd not only be sent head-on into countless battles and kill tons of innocent people whilst being led by a complete lunatic, then I guess this community would be pretty good for you. But due to its severe drawbacks, the Reapers are coming in at 13th for me.
I really don't think there's much I could add to the whole Reapers commentary, aside from the fact that they were just so damn cool, but also wasted potential.
In at the 12th spot, I was pretty torn, but I ended up selecting the Scavengers. Now, let's quickly address the elephant in the room. Yes, this community do live in a dump, so it would smell so bad, especially in the summer, be crawling with roaches and rats that could carry diseases, covered in sharp rusting metals that could also result in tetanus, and a plethora of other health complications, and it's all round just a smelly, unhygienic pit. The community also speak in this broken English, just a year into the apocalypse, which isn't like a big problem, it would just be super annoying to hear it every single day. So it's around now you're probably asking yourself, how on earth does this community rank higher than the Reapers, a bunch of highly trained killers? Well, firstly, you're not sent into battle every other day to slaughter innocent people, and you were led by Jadis, a morally decent person who enforces a good set of rules. We see no examples in the show of internal conflict amongst the group or violence towards each other, and after the group are eventually slaughtered by Simon, we see how distraught this makes Jadis, showing us all she deeply cared for her people. And whilst the dump may be a big stinky disease-filled pit, it does serve as an effective barrier stopping both the dead and other humans from entering, so their base is pretty fortified as well as having access to a lot of weapons. Their coalition with the Saviours, although it would ultimately become their downfall, did keep them protected for a long period of time into the apocalypse, and they also have a large number of members that could all contribute and make them a formidable group to fight, purely down to their manpower. And finally, I can't speak for anybody other than Jadis, but her sleeping arrangements, as seen in Season 8, actually looked like post-apocalyptic luxury. I'll put a picture on screen of where she was sleeping now. So they definitely claw back a few points on the comfort level if they were all living like this. Ultimately though, the group isn't shown to have any reliable food or water supplies, and they do live in a disease-ridden dump. However, they do have great fortifications, an alliance with the Saviours, and a reasonable and trusting leader. And if regular members had access to shipping containers like Jadis's, then I would class that as post-apocalyptic luxury. They are also just a nicer bunch of people than a lot of the communities I've ranked below them.
Jada's had a shit haircut. They all smelled like garbage because, they lived in garbage. Their homemade bizarro language was dumb. You know what? I'd honestly just swipe left on this community.
Now, probably surprising many of you based on how high I've ranked it, in at 11th I have Terminus. Now hear me out here. Yes, this is a group of cannibals that advertise their location to pretty much anybody within a 100-mile radius, but their actual base had a lot of potential. Not only did they have functional radios, a secure perimeter, electricity, rain catchers, vegetable patches to grow their own food, but they were also strategically located in an area where 5 railways cross path. This would give them clear routes for supply runs into other cities by simply just following the tracks that had already been laid down for them. And by all means, Terminus should have been a successful and flourishing post-apocalyptic community. Of course, we know in reality it wouldn't play out like that. Firstly, you'd have to revert to cannibalism if you wanted to be a part of this group, which is pretty horrific stuff. And secondly, the group advertised their location to everybody, making them extremely vulnerable to invasions and attacks from others. Which is how the community went off the rails to even begin with, as Gareth, the termites leader, explains in season 5 of the show that Terminus actually started off as a safe sanctuary for people, but of course eventually the wrong people would turn up, capture them, and throw the termites into train carts, imprisoning them and torturing them. When Gareth and his people did eventually escape this horrific ordeal, they were never the same and the damage had been done. The group would then revert to cannibalism and luring in weary travellers to their doom, with the possessions room of Terminus being one of the most gut-wrenching environmental storytelling scenes in the entire Walking Dead. We see the belongings of kids in there, implying that they didn't discriminate who they were killing when making their dinner. I think I'm ranking Terminus this high based on what they could have been though. If they'd taken down the signs and not been cannibals, this could have been a functioning and effective community. They had the manpower, the guns, the fortifications necessary to survive the apocalypse. The group had set up rain catchers, grew their own vegetables, and made their base in a strategic location. Ultimately though, Terminus would fall to their own stupidity and biting off more than they could chew, no pun intended. And the drawbacks for this community are blatantly obvious. It's Gareth as a leader and the fact they are cannibals. But hey, if you were to join the termites, at least you'd have a warm bed, a roof over your head, and also, you'd probably enjoy a barbecue every now and then. To be honest, just because this community ranks above many others, it still doesn't make it good. It just makes it, well, I guess less awful to live in than some of the others on this list. And for those reasons, Terminus is coming in at 11th place.
The Terminites eat people. They're just zombies with extra steps. Also, despite having a decent base, they were eventually going to bite off more than they could chew, as they literally advertised their location everywhere. Like, guys, eventually a large group would find them and overpower them. Oh wait, that's what happened. Because Rick's group kind of murked them. All because Rick's group saw their advertising on the railroads.
The first community to enter our top 10 is Hershel's farm. Okay, I'll come clean here. There may be a bit of bias in this pick because season 2 of the show is not only my favourite, but Hershel's farm as a location has always given me these warm, nostalgic vibes. But I genuinely think Hershel's farm could have been so great had the group just made a few tweaks. Firstly, the farm had chickens, cows and pigs, livestock that could actually feed you for months, whether that be with milk and eggs or by actually slaughtering them. They also had fields of crops to go alongside it, giving you a sustainable food source. The location was remote, meaning you were hidden from other survivors, and there was a low population around that area, meaning there weren't that many walkers around either. You were close enough to the city or surrounding towns that you could make supply runs out to them, but you're far enough away to avoid the problems that come with living inside these populated areas. The property had a number of freshwater wells as well, giving you a reliable drinking source, and flat land surrounded the farmhouse itself, making it a good vantage point to see if anything is coming from miles away. Now obviously the farm would only last a singular season because other than a few fences there were no walls or fortifications to keep walkers or even other people out. And this is ultimately how the location fell and its biggest weakness. Now make no mistake, much like the Atlanta camp, our survivors got extremely lucky that the farm even lasted as long as it did, because they were all lulled into this false sense of security. But had they somehow managed to build some kind of wall around Hershel's property, this could have been a genuinely phenomenal place to set up long term. The group knew this area. Hershel was a vet who grew into a capable doctor and surgeon. The livestock and wells would have you fed and hydrate you for months. My point is, the farm had all the foundations to be amazing, and although it severely loses points on longevity, fortifications, and the amount of firearms they had, these are things the group could fix or have worked on to improve. It does also make you think, if Shane never tried to kill Rick that night and attract the horde of walkers, how long would our group have actually stayed in this location? There are some obvious safety issues here, but much like the reason I put Terminus so high is because I can see the potential in this place. But look, potential can only get you so far, hence why Hershel's farm comes in at 10th place. But the people are nice. At this point the group are kind of co-led by both Rick and Hershel, but these are two morally good people. They have food and water to last, the location of the community is good, and the members are capable. You have a medic in the form of Hershel, a hunter in Daryl, and a leader in Rick. This community is far from perfect, but it's the first place on the list I'd actually consider joining, and ultimately is a colossal step up from everything that's come before it.
Hershel's farm had a ton of potential, but generally speaking, as it was in the show, its greatest strength could be found in just how remote the farm was. Aside from that, there was no perimeter defense, not enough firearms, a tainted well, limited shelter, and the human capital present at Hershel's farm just wasn't enough for long-term survival. A lot of improvements would have to be made to make the farm top tier.
In at the 9th spot and coming marginally above Hershel's farm is the Grady Memorial Hospital. Now off the bat, this is probably the most luxurious post-apocalyptic setup on the list thus far. They have solar panels on the roof giving the community power. They have rain catchers rigged up to pipes, meaning you could have a shower and access to running water, and they have a small vegetable patch on the roof, which couldn't sustain the entire community, but at least generates some food. And finally, they all sleep in reclining hospital beds, which is basically a 5-star hotel in post-apocalyptic terms. Oh, and being situated inside a hospital also of course means they have pretty much unlimited access to medical supplies. Now you're probably thinking, what's the catch? And there's definitely a fair few. Whilst yes, all of that is brilliant for long-term survival, the group are located within the city of Atlanta, a hostile place that is crawling with walkers. They are also led by a woman named Dawn, who isn't the worst person herself, but she does allow some pretty horrible people to live under her command, such as Officer Gorman, who is renowned in the community for being a complete creep towards women, a bully to anyone, and an all-round nasty character. Dawn in general is a pretty weak leader as well, and they seemingly have a lack of numbers as seen in the show, and despite many of their members being cops, they only really have their pistols, so are also lacking somewhat in the firearms department as well. The group are also set up on the higher floors of the Grady Memorial Hospital, which is admittedly good defense against walkers, as they've destroyed pretty much any way of getting up to their floors like lifts and stairwells. However, this blessing could also become their kryptonite. The group rely on supply runs to bring in much of their food, and being in a building with only one way up or down leaves them vulnerable to a siege by other survivors. Another group could come in, outweight them, and starve the community out before going in and picking off any survivors. I think it's so hard to rank this community because they nearly have it all, but their location and leadership weigh them down significantly, which ultimately stops them from breaking into the top 5 of this list.
Well, once again, I don't think I have much to add here, as I think Theo did a great job. The only thing I'd like to add, though, is that it's apparently been confirmed that the Grady Memorial cops eventually all died off, like off-screen. I think it was Greg Nicotero confirmed this. Maybe Theo can confirm this for me.
At 8th, rather controversially, I've put Woodbury. Now, I know what you're all saying, how on earth does it rank this low? And whilst yes, Woodbury was severely ahead of its time, being the first community in the series to be able to keep some form of normality to their everyday lives during the apocalypse. I mean, it had generators for power, running water, an armory stocked with guns, military grade vehicles, and on the surface a stable and reliable leader in the governor. This community was truly formidable, as it had the likes of Merle running its military, 10 feet walls surrounding the houses, space to grow and farm, and a sizable group of over 70 people calling this place home. And on the surface, it does look amazing, but once you peel back that curtain, Woodbury was always going to be a ticking time bomb, and that's down to one person and one person only, the governor. This man's ego and bloodlust were always going to be the downfall of this place, and even if he had bested our survivors at the prison, he would have wound up getting him and all of Woodbury killed eventually by attacking other survivors. The pure-rooted evil within Philip Blake caused him to turn a machine gun on his own people and mow them all down, and I don't know about you, but that is not someone I want to be taking orders from. The governor is very unpredictable, and you run the risk of doing or saying something wrong and being killed for it in this community. The guy has a torture chamber, for God's sake. Look, Woodbury had the luxury of warm beds, electricity, and warm water, and was of course ahead of its time, which immediately propels it up this list, but for me, it just can't go any higher than this based on who's leading it. The governor wouldn't hesitate to kill you if he was having a bad day. He'd send you on the front line into battles against other communities, and he keeps live walkers inside the walls for quote-unquote entertainment. I mean, one small accident and you'd have a small horde of walkers attacking from within inside the walls. This community was always a ticking time bomb, which is why for me it comes in a rather mediocre 8th place. Now, to be fair, all of what I've just said would assume that I know the governor's true personality deep down. And in the scenario of me being a weary traveller on the road, I, and probably all of you, would jump at the opportunity to join Woodbury. But Michonne could sense something was wrong about the governor and the community of Woodbury, so I'd like to think eventually I too would come to this same conclusion.
You know what? Woodbury was kinda goated. It was well defended, the leadership was solid, manpower was plentiful, there were no comparable regional rivals, food and water were bountiful, and living conditions were excellent. Woodbury's downfall really came down to the one weakness in its command structure, being the governor's ego. If I was Theo, I'd rank this a bit higher, to be honest.
Oceanside as a community is kind of hard to rank, as it spends such a long time existing in the overall narrative, but just not on screen. We never really get to properly see the ins and the outs of this settlement and how it all works, but what we do know is it's a remote group of around 40 individuals, though it is worth noting that all of their men and boys were slaughtered by Simon when they refused to cooperate in the Saviour Alliance. So the community is entirely made up of women and 4 young boys. Right away, we know the group are highly skilled at fishing and are situated right on the coast, giving them access to the ocean, which is an unlimited supply of fish. And fish is a great source of protein and omega-3. The group live in wooden shacks that offer protection from the elements and have furniture and beds inside, although at this stage in the list, pretty much everywhere I'm about to mention has beds and furniture, so from now on I'm not going to be mentioning it as much. Oceanside is also fortified with a tall wooden fence surrounding its perimeter, and they have several functioning boats. The group were led by Netanya, however after her death her granddaughter Cindy would take over, giving the group a stable and morally good leader. The group are shown in Season 7 to have lights on, meaning they must have a functional generator or some solar power system, and the community survives for well over a decade into the apocalypse, featuring in Season 11 of the show. Also being situated on the coast makes the community easier to defend, as the ocean acts as a natural barrier from most things. And finally, they are shown to have a pretty big armory, as when they finally help our survivors in the Saviour War, the group come well armed. So what exactly are the drawbacks? Well, the wooden wall that surrounds their perimeter, whilst being tall, is only made of logs, so it could easily be burnt down by invaders or toppled over by excess walker weight from leaning on them. Like mentioned, all of their men have been slaughtered, so many of the community's members are either elderly women or young children, and they have quite closed off views on the apocalypse. Whilst this place would be secluded from other survivors, being on the coast opens a new threat of harsh weather conditions, severe winds and rain, which could cause problems to the wall, allowing the dead to flood in during intense storms. And there's even hurricane risks here. We don't really see much of Oceanside, and I can't remember a single wide-angle shot showing the entirety of the community, so we are pretty unsure if they have things like warm water, solar panels, and livestock. So for all of those reasons, I think 7th is a pretty good place for Oceanside.
Oceanside, to me, was kinda interesting because it just reminded me of DC Comics' Island of Themyscira. You know, the home of the Amazons and Wonder Woman? Honestly, not a bad community if you ask me. I think Theo's points here are sufficient enough to warrant me being lazy with my input.
As we close in on our top 5, marginally missing out in 6th place, I've put the Sanctuary. Now, on my original draft for this video, I actually had this community in at 4, but upon hearing Captain Gold's thoughts on it and its instability post Season 9, I think this is the right position for the community. As the beating heart of the Saviour Empire, this abandoned factory served as a hub for trade. If you lived here, you'd have your own room, an influx of food and goods coming in daily from the various other communities that were a part of the Saviour Coalition, and probably the best fortifications and defences we've seen thus far on the list, whilst also having access to a truckload of guns. And whilst Negan is positioned into that villain spot narratively throughout seasons 7 and 8, he actually is a good leader. He keeps unity amongst his men and enforces strict rules that, if broken, can result in death, as we see when one of the Saviours tries to take advantage of an imprisoned Sasha. On top of this, there are a vast array of outposts that you could situate yourself at, multiple medics that operate within the Sanctuary, and several crop fields. And the Sanctuary also has the biggest population we've seen on the list this far, coming in at a staggeringly high 500. Look, it's absolutely no fluke that this community ruled over several states in America, and the secrecy and seclusion of this base kept it safe for over a year into the apocalypse. However, the reason it doesn't quite crack that top 5 is it's not really self-sustaining. After the time skip in Season 9, the Sanctuary is struggling massively due to its loss of manpower and its over-reliance on trade. And even in its peak, you had unsavoury characters like Simon playing second fiddle to Negan. Oh, and that coalition I was talking about earlier, well, it's more of a dictatorship and caused several communities to build up a big vendetta against this place, which does mean you'd have a lot of enemies, and that would ultimately be this location's downfall after taking on Rick and the others in the Saviour War. But the Sanctuary is incredibly safe. It has a stable leader, a large army with firepower, trade routes spanning for miles, and functional generators. Although after Negan's imprisonment this place would slowly fall into disarray, I think in its peak it would have been a great place to call home. That is, until you're sent into battle against a prime Rick Grimes, who would probably cut your post-apocalyptic journey short.
So, the Sanctuary, by itself, is actually pretty trash as far as I'm concerned. But as the capital of the Saviour Empire, it was honestly pretty solid. It was heavily defended by walker fences, concrete walls, kill zones on the way to the factory, and even dynamite tripwires on the highway, which were designed to decimate wandering walker hordes. The factory itself had plenty of useful facilities and assets. But, as we see in the time skip after the Saviour War, this is not a community that could survive without its vassals.
Entering the top 5, we have Hilltop. Now, this is one of the most infamous locations in the series. After its introduction in Season 6, it would feature in every season until the show's conclusion in Season 11. The community consists of a towering wall surrounding the Barrington Manor house, located, as the name would suggest, on top of a hill. This place survived well over a decade into the apocalypse and had a self-sufficient food source. As we saw even during the harsh winters of Season 9, this place still had plentiful amounts of food, despite the struggles of Alexandria and the Sanctuary. Its location also allows it to be a key vantage point, and its seclusion kept it largely hidden from other survivors. In terms of accommodation, people slept in the rooms of the manor or were located in trailers parked outside the house. This community had a doctor, a blacksmith, and several farmers amongst its members, making up for a well clued up and kind bunch of residents. They also received blueprints off the character of Georgie, giving them knowledge on how to cultivate the land effectively and improve their water supply problem. This is a well-functioning, largely self-sufficient settlement. However, this community has always lacked a competent leader. Gregory led the town for years but was a coward and a selfish man. Then Maggie took over and was largely absent, and finally Tara was beheaded by the Whisperers. This settlement does also have crop fields, but they are located outside the walls, which means they could be stolen from, lost to walker hordes trampling on them, or just set on fire by attackers. And as we know, during the Whisperer War, Hilltop came under heavy siege and was mostly burnt down due to its over-reliance on wooden structures. This community has two glaring problems. Firstly, space. It's quite small, so you can only house probably around 50 members, and there's not really any room for expansion. And secondly, there is shown to be no large fresh water supply near this place. So other than rain catchers, this place doesn't have a consistent water supply. Although that being said, it does kind of fix the issue with the water towers addition after the time skip, but that doesn't totally fix the problem. Ultimately, Hilltop would be a nice place to live. You'd have the fortifications, an alliance with Alexandria and Hilltop, making you a formidable foe, and friendly people and an abundance of food. The drawbacks only really come from its poor leadership and its smaller size, as seen when it was decimated by the Whisperers, but due to its relationship with other communities, residents were temporarily housed in different locations, whilst restoration began on this settlement. So overall, I do think Hilltop would be a pretty good place to live.
Hilltop was pretty goated. Big wall, lots of land for crops, Barrington House was dope and provided excellent situational awareness. The community also had some solid human capital, and the community was also led by one of my favorite characters ever, being Gregory the My only issue with Hilltop, discounting the subpar leadership of Maggie, is the fact that Hilltop has no easy access to potable water. You either have to go get some or hope that it rains enough throughout the year to meet your community's hydration needs. Like, there's a reason why they built a water tower there after the time skip, and no, water towers aren't magical sources of endless H2O in the zombie apocalypse.
Now in at 4 I've got the Kingdom, and this place nearly has it all. A metal wall running around its perimeter, space for vegetables to be grown inside the walls, multiple structures that allow for a large population to be housed here, the necessary guns to protect itself, and a good and honest leader in King Ezekiel. Now I'll come clean. As you'll hear from Captain Gold's segment in a moment, I originally had the Kingdom in 6th, but I did swap it with the Sanctuary after doing some more research. They have sufficient food, a water supply, they'd hosted trade fairs, and they also, much like Hilltop, survived for well over a decade into the apocalypse, without getting desolated by the Whisperers. But that being said, this community would eventually be abandoned due to the boiler breaking and severe fire damage, even resulting in a few casualties. However, in my opinion, that was just a ploy from the writers to lessen the amount of communities in the show and move everyone along to the Commonwealth. But anyway, in its peak, the Kingdom had over 100 residents and kept their coalition with the Saviors a secret from its own people. After their involvement in the Savior War, however, many of their capable soldiers were decimated at the hands of a Savior machine gun, except for Jerry, of course, because he's the GOAT. But after this incident, the population would be in the low 40s and mostly made up of elderly and children. But this community would be great to live in, as it has a stable water supply, it grows its own food, has hunters that can catch game in the nearby forest, solar panels to power it, and a good leader in Ezekiel. However, there's one small problem, and that problem goes by the name of Shiva. Yes, I know she's a trained tiger on a chain, but still, I'm not sure how I'd feel living with a tiger. You've basically got a house in a tiger exhibit at the zoo. All it takes is her to have one bad morning and she might bite your hand off, or even worse, eat you totally. On top of this, tigers eat around 6 kg of meat a day on average. So imagine you've spent all day hunting a deer, and before you can even tuck in to enjoy it, 80% of that deer is donated to a tiger that's not even yours. and then the remaining 20% of that deer is split amongst you and the other 100 residents. Look, this place is brilliant, but loses points for the fact it fell into disrepair eventually, and has a live tiger inside the walls. But other than that, the kingdom is a pretty good place to live.
In my personal opinion, the kingdom should be right under the Commonwealth. It was well defended, had a ton of manpower, an ample pool of human capital, enough food to live comfortably even while paying tribute to the saviors, and its leader, being King Easy Kill, effectively avoided conflict with the saviors more so than any other community. That is until the Savior War happened. You know what, it's too bad the community went up in flames due to a lack of building maintenance. Also, I have no idea how they met their hydration needs, but it looks like they managed to do just fine. So, good job, King Easy Kill.
As we move into the top 3, I know this pick is going to ruffle a few feathers, but I have the prison. Would I rather live in the kingdom or Hilltop? Of course I would. But do I think they were safer than the prison was? No, absolutely not. The prison only fell because a lunatic with a tank was insistent on tearing it down, and I think every community, bar the one in the number 1 spot, would have suffered the same fate to an invasion via a tank. That being said, it does lose points on longevity, as the community only survived for a matter of months, rather than years. So why is it coming in third? Whilst yes, you'd be sleeping in a prison on beds that aren't that comfy, this place was entirely self-sufficient. It had months worth of food in the cafeteria, fruit and veg growing in the front field, livestock, rain catchers and a freshwater lake nearby. The cells also acted as safety cages. If you fell asleep at night and someone died and reanimated, you'd be locked into your own cell, so it would stop internal outbreaks. You had Rick Grimes leading you, Hershel being a medic, a double-layered 20 feet high chain link fence protecting you before you even got to the thick concrete of the cell block, and you had the medical supplies from the infirmary. Look, there's a reason before the governor wanted to destroy this place, he wanted to take it for himself, because it was incredibly valuable. And whilst this top 10 is filled with communities that survived longer and more luxuriously than this one, I think its potential alone shoots it up the list for me. I mean, in the early parts of Season 4, we saw just how effective this living arrangement could be, and I really think if the governor hadn't driven into this place with a tank, it would have lasted for decades. I will accept some small additions would have needed to be made, like fitting solar panels, clearing the cell blocks, securing the entirety of the prison, and the expansion of livestock and people within it. But the only real negatives of this place are it's not as comfy as the others, and it was destroyed by a military-grade tank. Oh, and it was dark and dingy, but look, the prison had weapons, it was appropriately fortified, a good group of people in it, and most importantly, it's a prison, something that people are designed to not be able to escape from, and that very design feature in the event of a zombie apocalypse would become your best friend and keep you safe. Reinforced concrete, strong metal bars, and a tall perimeter fence. So for its potential and the standard of living relative to many other communities in its time, the prison, for me, is coming in third. I mean, at least there isn't a live tiger running around in it.
The prison is just so damn iconic that it's hard not to place it high on any ranking list. It had land for crops, it was well defended, and it was very close to many sources of fresh water. The remote location also made it unlikely that people would find it. But, given its layout and design, it was clearly fertile land for an airborne pathogen. And we saw this in Season 4 when the superflu came in and crippled the prison's population. Also, chain-linked fences and razor wire aren't exactly solid defensive barriers.
In at second place, we have the iconic Alexandria. It has the luxury of being a doomsday estate fitted with real townhouses, running water, a fresh water source inside the walls, electricity via solar panels, and a drainage system, which is very overlooked, and the infrastructure to support expansion. On top of all of this, it has its own armory and a strong tall steel wall running around its perimeter, offering far superior defense to any wooden or chain link ones we've seen on the list thus far. This type of wall not only can withstand greater pressure from the dead, but also requires low maintenance. They have green space inside the walls to farm and grow, making the community entirely self-sufficient, at least until Beta and a horde of walkers came through and trampled on everything. And whilst on that topic, Alexandria just has this incredible bounce back ability. Every time the community looks like it might fall into disarray, it just survives somehow. The Horde invasion in No Way Out, the Saviors literally bombed this place, the Whisperer's siege, I mean each and every time it manages to recover, and that's a testament to its resilient and relentless inhabitants. It's a place where children can live a semi-normal life and play outside in green spaces. It's geared for the future of the apocalypse. It has a council, a doctor's surgery, and offers jobs to people. It's run by kind individuals you could bond with. I mean, they even managed to build a windmill in here. In the pretty bleak world of The Walking Dead, Alexandria has always stood as a symbol of hope and offers, for the most part, some form of stability. Its leaders have always been good, from Diana to Rick to the council. They are consistent and keep the community alive, and its partnership with other communities like the Kingdom or Hilltop allow it to trade and be a part of a bigger army. The only real drawbacks here are it can't hold a huge population, and there are blind spots on the wall, as demonstrated in the Wolves' invasion of Alexandria. It also is not built to withstand an attack like the Whisperers did, and the fallout of that attack meant it fell into disarray for months on end, even having a food shortage at one point. But this is pretty much the perfect post-apocalyptic community, so I would love to join it.
Look, I really don't have much to say about Alexandria. I mean, it's definitively the goat of post-apocalyptic communities. It has an expansive metal wall, crops, awesome homes, access to potable water, a pool of excellent human capital, a sizable pool of raw manpower, and even access to solar panels and eventually a windmill. It's just amazing.
And of course, coming in at the #1 spot, it's the Commonwealth. Look, whilst yes, I prefer Alexandria as a community, the Commonwealth is essentially a fully functional city. I mean, they even have fairgrounds, ice cream stands, and celebrate holidays. It's estimated this community has a population of over 50,000 people, which is over 1,000 times more than every other community on this list put together. Look, of course it has its problems. Politically, there is a clear class divide, but it's not led by a bloodthirsty dictator at least. And it functions as an entirely self-sufficient hub for people to not just survive, but live. They have solar power, running water, jobs, a court for criminals to be tried at. I mean, the quality of life in this place is just leaps and bounds better than any other on the list. They don't just have a few medics, they have a fully functional hospital with x-rays and advanced medicine. It's a trade hub, it has its own military led by Mercer, and thick steel walls manned 24 hours a day running around its perimeter. This is hands down the best place to live in the world of The Walking Dead, and yes, there are small problems with it to do with the hierarchy, but this place has survived for over 12 years, functioning like a real town, and it's the only community in the entirety of the series that is able to stake that claim. This is the highest standard of living you could possibly find in the main series, and for that reason, the Commonwealth is coming in at my #1 spot.
Okay, I'll keep this one simple. The Commonwealth was so far ahead of the game that they could afford to have a literal bureaucracy. This is why I left them out of my community's ranking list in a much older video I did on my channel. The Commonwealth is just a cheat code, with the CRM and the spin-offs being the only civilization that's greater than this sprawling city.
And with that being said, that is every community in the Walking Dead main series ranked. Now, before I hear about it in the comments, no, I don't class the CDC as a community because it was only inhabited by Dr. Jenner, and a community by definition is a group of people. Secondly, there's the Highwaymen, but they joined the Kingdom pretty much as soon as we are introduced to them. And finally, the Governor's Camp in early Season 4, the one with Lily and Tara. And I'll admit it, I just flat out forgot them, but I would rank them in 15th, one spot below the Atlanta camp. I would like to say a huge thank you to Captain Gold for helping me out on this colossal video. A link to his channel can be found at the very top of the description. A lot of time and effort from both of us has gone into the making of this video, so if you did enjoy it, please do like and subscribe to both of our channels. Let me know what your rankings would be down below in the comments, and once again, a huge thank you for watching, and I'll see you all next time. Goodbye.